Today's a special day for me. Actually, it was 35 years ago today. That would be 1973 on the 28th of September. In an apartment in Granville Street near Stoner Park in West LA, that I, sitting there at the table with my younger brother Mark, bowed my head, said a simple prayer, laid down my arms, surrendered the fight, and decided to follow Jesus of Nazareth. 35 years. You know, I was thinking about this last night as I was driving back from an event, how I was used to view my spiritual mentors who were 10 years in the Lord, and I would think, gosh, they've known the Lord for 10 years. They must be perfect. They must never sin. They must have all their problems solved. Well, here I am 35 years into this journey, and I got to tell you, it's been kind of like having a tiger by the tail for me. Some of you have heard me tell my story, how I thought I was too smart to be a Christian, and then, in a sense, ironically, I gave my life ultimately for a defense of the intellectual credibility of the kind of worldview that Jesus of Nazareth promoted, and demonstrating as best I can that Christianity is worth thinking about. But I'll have to say, on a personal note, the personal journey, it's been like having a tiger by the tail. It isn't as if it's always made sense to me. And if anybody looks at me thinking, wow, 35 years of the Lord, I bet you he never sins anymore, you got another thing coming. Because that just isn't the way it is. But it has been an adventure. Just like any adventure, it has its high points and its low points, just like any relationship. It has its seasons, and this is one of the reasons I think that Paul in 2 Timothy told Timothy in chapter 4, in season and out of season, do your job, Timothy, preach the gospel in season and out of season, understanding that with every Christian, there are seasons in which you're in and on top of things, and there are seasons in which you're out and not on top of things, and it doesn't matter. Your job is still the same if you're a follower of Christ. Now, I don't know that I've been so good at always being consistent in that. I try to, but I'm like anybody else who gets caught sideways in life and then has to deal with those things that are less than satisfying, or areas of my character that the Lord is having me deal with, and that's a struggle. So I'm just like you in that regard, probably, even after 35 years. But I will tell you one thing that has made a significant difference to me. When I became a follower of Christ in 1973, I was a student at UCLA, and I was a loud, opinionated, obnoxious, long-haired hippie. And now, 35 years later, I am no longer a long-haired hippie. I'm actually no longer as obnoxious, I think, and maybe not quite as loud. Probably a little bit more opinionated. But I think that there has been transformation in my life in good measure because of people in my life that have facilitated that. And I have to say, there are two people that were central. One was my brother Mark, who labored with me before and after I came to the Lord, and still does to this day, as a friend and a confidant and as a counselor. He's my younger brother, but he's older than me in the Lord. He became a Christian a couple of years before I did, and prayed for me and shared with me when it didn't seem like anything was getting through, yet it was, a little bit at a time. And after a couple of years of effort and talking and praying, I came to my senses. God was working in my life and brought me forward. And I hope that's an encouragement to some of you who are laboring with some hard-headed cases that you think aren't listening and will never come to their senses. You never know what God is doing. And so my brother Mark was central in that, and for that I'm thankful, and I thank him. The other person, initially especially, that was central in my transformation from loud, opinionated, obnoxious to not as loud, not as obnoxious, was Craig Englert. And Craig is a pastor now in Kihei, Maui, but Craig, for 2 years at great personal risk to life and limb for him, took me under his wing, along with his dear wife, Kathy, and I think led me by the hand through the most difficult times those first couple of years for a new follower of Christ, and helped me through some tough times, and gave me a boot in the pants when I needed it. And it was, as I pointed out, is at no small expense to him in time and effort and anguish. But I like to think that his efforts were well spent. And I have had other mentors since then, near and far, and I understand there are different motifs for kind of passing the faith on, passing the baton on, as Paul did to Timothy. And, I've mentioned J.P. Moreland, for example. Different kind of relationship than I had with Craig, but no less, in a sense, impactful. But I know with a certainty that without those people, I would not be here with you today, and I wouldn't have been for the last 18 years, because it was those relationships that made all the difference in the world. In part because with Craig, for example, and the others who followed, they were not content merely to defend the truth. I mean, this is important, and I see 2 Timothy as a motif for that, as kind of a standard for that. And it's my favorite book. It's not the most theologically profound. I think Paul's book of Romans is like that, but I think, in a sense, for practical Christian living, for my money, as a defender of the faith, trying to carry the torch here in the difficult times of the 21st century, I think 2 Timothy speaks volumes to me. It's very clear. It's very straightforward. Its basic message is guard the gospel, guard the truth that has been passed on to you by me, Paul says. And in one sense, that was part of Craig's and the others' influence in my life, guarding that, protecting it, passing it on. But they were not just, in a sense, guarding it in the abstract. They were passing it on to a person. And when Paul wrote his last letter to Timothy, which was the last letter of his life, knowing he was about to die, he penned these important words, and he sent the letter not to a church, but to a person. He was passing the baton to an individual, because Paul understood the need to entrust others with this message, who would then carry it to others still. And in 2 Timothy 2:2, there was a verse that was one of the first ones that I memorized, which was really the heart of my relationship with Craig, where Paul tells Timothy, the things that you have heard from me and learned from me in the presence of many witnesses. In other words, it's public teaching. It's the standard stuff. These entrust to faithful men who would be able to teach others also. And in that you have those 4 generations of passing that torch, Paul to Timothy, Timothy to faithful men, and those faithful men teaching others also. And so the torch is passed, the baton is passed